so let's jump here into part 4 of section 4. And we are continuing to look at quantitative data, so data in the attributes table that you count or measure. And another way of symbolizing that is through graduated symbols. So let's pop back here to our map that we've been working on. Let me save it. And let's take a look at, so we looked at graduated colors. The next piece we're going to look at is graduated symbols. I'm going to skip over bivariate colors and unclassed colors. Right now we don't have a lot of applications for using those, and especially bivariate colors is kind of nuanced. And so just starting out here, we are going to go to graduated symbols, and the default, it's going to go to the first field in the attributes table that's symbolizable, and that's going to be area of land. We don't want that. We want to go ahead and let's look at the same data we looked at for graduated colors, and that's going to be all poverty households. And so if we take a look at all poverty households, we see that we've got up to 37 in our up to 37 households that are under the poverty line in the tracts with the least number. And so we've got the size of the symbol represents the number of families in poverty, so it's graduated. But just like for our graduated colors, we want to normalize this, because the large tracts are just going to would most likely have more families in poverty than small tracts, although that doesn't actually hold out here because we've got some small tracts that are pretty dense. But we're going to have more readable data if we divide the total number of poverty households by, or the number of poverty households by the total number of households. So that gives us the proportion of households in poverty. Again, I'm going to go ahead and fix that label so it shows up as a percent. So I go over here, format labels. Rather than numeric, we're going to choose percentage, and right now the number represents a fraction, and I don't want any decimals on there. And so now I can go back, and we've got our percent, so it's easier for us to take a look at and digest. We have 5 classes. I'm going to talk about the number of classes in just a bit. But with these symbols, with graduated symbols, the thing that you really want to watch out for is having enough contrast between the size of the symbols that your reader can differentiate among them. So you need them to be able to go from the legend, see this size of circle, and then correlate that with which circle it represents on the map. Now the biggest one is kind of okay, but these ones in here, let's see if we can find a census tract that has 19 to 32%. You know, it's like, oh, is that this one? Maybe it's this one. They're kind of close in size, so we can make sure there's a little bit more contrast in the sizes in a couple ways. And one of that is to make the minimum size smaller and the maximum size bigger. And so we can kind of see what effect that has. And so we've got a little bit more contrast. Still these ones in the middle. The second piece is to mess around with a number of classes. So right now we've got a certain amount of resolution. We can see a certain amount of detail with 5 classes. What if we just simplified it to 3 classes? It would be easier to read, right? Small, medium, large. And we can see how much data we keep there. We can tell that there's enough contrast in these sizes that I can actually read them. I can actually interpret that a little bit better. So what you can see from this is that in many cases, graduated colors is a little bit easier to read and interpret than graduated symbols. So you've kind of seen that with me. I had to reduce these really to 3 to be able to tell between them. Now we could probably change those sizes a little bit and still see the difference. But when you get 5 to 7, our eyes have an easier time looking at differences in color than small differences in size. All right, so that's something to think of. Let's go back here to our PDF. Graduated symbols. What works and what doesn't? Well, So usually you're going to want to normalize. Okay, so I'm going to say normalize here. And then what works and what doesn't. Need enough contrast in size for legibility. So your viewer can tell things apart. So you probably need to adjust that. Fewer classes helps with legibility. Of course, you lose a little bit of information that way, so you really have to finesse that and kind of take a look at it. So you need enough contrast and size to have legibility. All right, and so in the example, apparently I did that too. All right, proportional symbols are going to be similar to graduated symbols. Let's pop back here to the map and show you. And graduated symbols are just the symbol size is correlated to a label, and apparently I'd have to change these into percents again. If I go to proportional symbols, the symbol size is no longer part of a category. It's associated with, let's go to poverty households, all poverty households. I'm going to normalize that by the total households. Okay. Now I don't set up the classes. Now it's just the size of these dots is actually proportional to the actual number in the number in the attribute table. So I can't change these. I mean, I can change the minimum size, but they're going to have their relation, the dots relationship to one another is fixed because it's determined by the numbers in the attributes table. Okay, so these dots are actually proportional to the number, or in this case, to the percent of families in poverty. So you get a little bit different look. In general, at least for this, you're going to have a little bit less contrast in your symbols, but the symbols are more like literally meaningful in that they're exactly proportional to the number of households in poverty, the percent of households in poverty. So there's that. So that's graduate or proportional symbols. So in these, you can't adjust the contrasted symbol sizes. They are proportional to the numbers in the attribute table. Okay, table. What else should you know? So these are meaningful, but often harder to read. Okay, there you go, proportional symbols. So there's another option for symbolizing quantitative data. Now let's take a look at a couple other options. Let's look at dot density, and I'm going to tell you why it's dangerous. So let's go back to our map. Following along with me, you guys are doing great. Okay, let's say that so we don't lose anything in the crash, and we'll come back and finesse a couple things for our tasks later. But dot density. So with these colors, area of land, no. Let's do poverty households. So yeah, that color is not working for me. I don't know if there we go. So what we're seeing now is these dots represent the density of, the number of dots represents the number of houses in poverty, and it's not the exact number of dots. It's just a density that's going to be one dot is equal to 9 households in poverty. So you can see that when someone first looks at this map, they're going to say, what are the dots? They're going to think those are specific locations. Those specific locations, is that where somebody in poverty lives? That's going to be somebody who's thinking intuitively about the map. That's what they're first going to think with dot density. So dot density is a little bit dangerous to use because of that. You have to pause, take a look at the legend, and you're like, okay, one dot is 9 households in poverty. But then if you were to go into one of these tracks, right, are you actually going to take the time to count each of the dots and multiply them by 9? Not really. If you zoom way out, you can kind of get a feeling. It kind of depends how far you zoom out. You can kind of get a feeling for where there's more poverty. But again, you're really not getting a great picture here. You're really not getting a great picture here because of these randomly placed dots. In general, a graduated color is going to work better. And sometimes people are easily going to misinterpret the dot density. So I'm not saying never use it. You may have situations where it kind of stands out as like, oh, this is probably a good way to symbolize my data. And those are probably going to be in cases where you have, this says dot value of 9, so I could change it here and instead do like a dot value of 100. Right, and then I'd have a lot fewer dots. With this busy base map, though, that really doesn't work. If I go back to my map, I could change it to like maybe a light gray canvas. That'd be less busy. I could take off my reference. So, maybe this helps the viewer. But you're a viewer, right? And you're looking at this data this way. It's kind of confusing, isn't it? Like at initial look, even if one dot is something easy like 100 households in poverty, you still kind of, it's a little harder to interpret, okay? So, so dot density, why is it dangerous? It's easily misinterpreted and awkward to view even when you understand it. All right. Next, charts. What works and what doesn't? Ooh, this is going to be fun. So let's go back to our map and leave the dangerous dot density and go into charts. So here's the thing about charts. First off, we need to get into the attribute table. Take a look at that again. So I right click, I go to the attribute table. I'm going to just hide this for a minute. In order to make a chart, we're going to do this and you're going to be like, oh wow, that's really cool. I want to use charts in my next map. The thing that you need to know about charts though is that you have to have more than one field of data that are numeric, that are quantitative, that are related to each other. So this is going to work well for census data, but you really have to have fields that you can compare to one another within the attribute table, and you'd be surprised how rarely that's going to be your data. Okay, so it's not very common that you will have a situation where charts work well, but the census data, it does work well. And so let's take a look at the data that I want to represent with the charts here are going to be data showing our young children. So we could look at like where it might make sense to invest in more childcare, preschool type of options. So we're going to look at our census tracts and where our young children are. So what we'll do is let's go ahead and close this. We're going to go to our, still the Spokane family poverty. We're going to pin that so it stays open. And we're going to use charts. And I feel like I would like to use a pie chart. That is actually a new function in this version of Pro. We get pie charts now, and I think they're really fun. And we're going to choose the slices for our pie. We don't want area of land to be a slice of our pie. And basically they're going to add up to a whole pie. So I want to look at children under 3, then children 3 and 4, and then if we're looking at preschool, let's look at also children 5, because sometimes they go to kindergarten, sometimes not quite yet. So now we have have, this whole represents all of the preschool age children, and then this is the proportion that are each age. So we can see that some, and I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit closer. These are going to work better if the pie charts just sit right inside each of the polygons. It gets messy if you zoom out. You'll have these lines are called leader lines, and the leader lines are pointing to the census tract. But my goodness, isn't that kind of confusing? So really, there's a scale that this is going to work at, and a scale that it's not going to work as well at. So what we can see is like this census tract has a lot more children, a larger proportion of children that are 5. Whereas this census tract, its largest proportion of children is that under 3 crowd. This census tract doesn't have any children apparently at age 5. So you can kind of see this one has a bunch of babies, or at least toddlers under 3. So kind of interesting. And a couple things with the options for the symbols here. These have a hollow background, which means you can see the base map underneath, and I think for the most part that's going to be your best choice. You can change and have a solid background if you mess with this. The size of each of these pie charts is fixed. If you noticed, each of these circles is the same size, although we know that in these tracts there's actually different numbers of children. If I wanted to represent the total number of children ages 5 and under, I would use the sum of selected fields. And so basically what that's going to do is the size of this pie chart is proportional to the number of children under 5 in that tract. So when we see a large pie chart, it means there's a lot of children under 5. And when we see a tiny pie chart, there's few children under 5. And so if you were trying to use this to emphasize, some decision making for policy folks, it could be useful to say, hey, look at this tract that's way up. I think that's probably maybe by Whitworth University. It looks like there's a lot of children here, and especially in the proportion of those children under 4 is pretty big. So you might want more early childhood care, so daycares and early childhood care there. Okay, and you could say we'd probably have less priority on putting in childcare. Like this is probably like lower South Hill, and it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of children there, and all of them seem to be under 3 years old. So anyway, charts can give you a lot of information, but the situations where you're going to use them, you're going to need to have multiple fields of meaningful data that are meaningful in comparison to one another. So yeah, looking at the number of children in certain age groups, that would work. Okay, so let's see, charts. Charts, you need to have multiple quantitative fields that are related or meaningful in comparison to one another. All right? Okay. So we already looked at that and did something similar that these also show. So we're good there. That these charts also show, or these figures. All right. So if you've got, I just kind of left this field for you to make any more notes that you want to. You probably, this has been kind of a full recording. You probably want to take a minute and just jot down some notes for yourself here on things that you want to remember or ideas you have for the future, and some of the things that we've talked about. You could certainly be jotting and go back earlier into the recording to some of the things I was talking about as I demonstrated. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this part, and we'll come into looking at the scale of symbols here in our next part.